Grüezi Amerika, Views from the Sister Republic, a University of St. Gallen podcast by Claudia Brüwiler. Grüezi miteinander, and welcome to a new episode of Views from the Sister Republics. To all those of you who had Latin, you know the saying, si vis pacem para bellum. If you want peace, prepare for war. And this is what Donald Trump asks of Europe. If you want peace, you can no longer rely on America's security blanket. And while a lot of states disregarded his warnings during his first administration, others have heeded the call. And one state in particular is ahead of the curve. In 2024, Poland spent 4.12% of its GDP on defense. So it is way ahead of the Western countries that are currently trying to grapple how they shift spending towards security. But how has Poland managed to so quickly outpace its European peers when it comes to defense spending? And how does it perceive the second Trump administration and the EU's response to it? I'm really glad to dive into these questions with Małgorzata Bonikowska, who is a professor at Vistula University in Warsaw, Poland, and a member of the St. Gallen Symposium community where we met originally. It's wonderful to have you on the podcast, Professor Bonikowska.
Thank you for having me. Just to add, I'm also professor at the University of Warsaw Center for Europe, and I also run a think tank called the Center for International Relations. 30 years old Polish think tank, yes.
Yeah, and you are also head and founder of the THINKTANK, named
That's
this
right.
way as a collaborative platform. So you have a lot of hats on, and you are in particular also a specialist on foreign policy, which is why I'm so excited to have you on this podcast, because we tend to focus on a very narrow type of perspective in our mediascape and also in our academic circles. We call it European, but it often disregards the Eastern European take on what is going on. So I'm really glad that we have this opportunity with you today. Now, you have been all over the world. You've recently been to India, and you have definitely also been to the US, where you did also a study program at Columbia University. Was Columbia your first US experience, or when have you been for the first time to the United States?
This was my first time. I was 26 years old, but before I had interactions with the Americans coming to Poland quite early, we know, that we Poles are very pro-American because of our history. America for us was the country who fought for independence first against the British monarchy. And in the same time, Poland, the Commonwealth of Poland, Lithuania, and Belarus and Ukraine, we were a very large country, but in the same time we were under threat of partitions, which unfortunately happened. So we lost our independence. That's why concept of freedom and fighting for independent state was very close to our heart. And our heroes, Tadeusz Kościuszko, Kazimierz Pułaski, were fighting in the US, and they are national heroes for the Americans as well. So this relationship started 250 years ago. And since then, America for us was always associated with freedom, liberty, democracy. So all these values we were really respecting. Today, it's still the case. Polish society is the most pro-American in the whole of Europe. But of course, we have now a lot of challenges for this love for the US with the new Trump administration and very strange behavior towards Russia and Ukraine. But my experience with Americans were very, very positive, and Columbia was absolutely fabulous time when it was New York, and it was a lot of learning. I was student of political science department and SIPA, School for International and Public Affairs. So definitely one of the best times in my life.
Do you have a favorite anecdote from your time in the US, something that you felt was really typical American?
Oh, that's unexpected. I had a lot of interactions there. Anything comes to my mind really particular, but I think for me, New York was per se a very strange city. Not really very American, very international. And I still remember my feelings that I was just sitting there and studying, and I did nothing, just waiting. And sooner or later, everybody was coming to New York. People from Europe, from my country, Poland, ministers from our government. So I was just feeling that that's really the center of the world.
So the world meeting in New York, and now the world has been looking very anxiously at times towards the goings-on in Washington, D.C. And you've already mentioned Poland has a very strong bond with the United States, has always been, since the end of communism, openly pro-American. But you've also mentioned that the perspective is a bit more, is shifting a bit given the Trump administration. A few weeks back, we had the now infamous encounter between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump in the Oval Office. And the reaction in the German-speaking part of Europe was very, very harsh. People in the media were commenting on this as the end of the West, that this was a disgrace and the end of transatlantic relations as we know it. What was the reaction in Poland? How did observers like yourself, the Polish public, react to the encounter between these two presidents?
Well, of course, we were all shocked. No one expected something like that. But then there were many interpretations. One was that this was done on purpose to provoke Zelensky to be rude a little bit, just to give Trump then reason to stop the help, to blackmail Ukrainians, because Trump, as we all know, wants to push both sides for a ceasefire. With Ukrainians, this thing is easier because the leverage the Americans have over Ukrainian army is really huge. They can, for example, switch off the intelligence or code to the HIMARS. With Russians, it's more difficult, but as we understand, the strategy is first to show a very, very beautiful picture to the Russians, that Russians can be back very soon to normal, that they will be back to G8, that there will be no sanctions. So again, Russia will be a player. The US wants to talk to Russia, but under condition that Russians will agree on some kind of a ceasefire. So if not, then we'll see Americans are maybe ready to switch off and then hit Russians with all strength. These were the comments. So we were seeing it as a kind of a provoked, arranged quarrel, just as an instrument, tactics of negotiations. But in the same time, of course, everybody was very sorry for Zelensky, but there were also some voices that Zelensky committed a mistake entering into the dispute first, and second, to do it in English, which was not his native language. He could have asked for an interpreter. He could have just, stopped commenting. So there were also comments that Zelensky here shouldn't have entered into a direct dispute with these two Americans in the Oval Office.
This is very interesting. Your summary suggests that there was a much more sober response in Poland than what I read and witnessed in, for instance, Switzerland and Germany, where we had really a nearly apocalyptic tone to the comments, where people were really getting, I would say, even frightened by what had happened, because it suggested that there was really a change in transatlantic relations. So there was no fear associated in Poland with the scene in the Oval Office?
Well, I wouldn't use a word fear. There was a shock for the style. No one really likes this way that, Trump himself and JD Vance and other Americans from this administration behave. We don't like what they say. We definitely not support any idea of talking with Russians without the Europeans and Ukrainians. But in the same time, I think Polish audience believes that A, it can be a certain strategy behind it. B, even if it's a harsh behavior, the intentions are good. And C, that Americans are so connected with the Europeans that even if Trump per se has certain ideas, it is not really leading into a radical divorce, but it will be maybe harsh, but also partners' relations. So now we know that there are negotiations about ceasefire. Now we know that Americans prefer to do it in this way, which is for us very strange, but we will see what will come out of this. The fear is about something else. The fear is about what Donald Trump has in mind as conditions of the ceasefire. Because our part of the world, we all know that the big powers can discuss many things and many places on the map. And Europe does not want to be seen as an object of negotiations of some other people, some other countries. We want to be at the table. And Poles feel it very much because we remember Yalta. We remember when our own country was just moved 1/3 towards the west. We remember when our eastern territories were just given to Stalin. And we remember that millions of people, Poles, but also Germans, were just moved to some other places without even asking them if they wanted or not. So we don't want anything like that happen again.
So there is, on the one side, a trust in a persisting transatlantic bond, trust in the US commitment to Europe, but at the same time also this very strong historic memory of what can happen and what can be the price if you are reduced to an object as a nation.
Yes, that's why we believe that Europe has to do everything possible together now, especially European Union, to show strength and to show the Americans that their concept that Europe is good for nothing at the moment and we have to just wait in the corridor until Americans and Russians decide is completely wrong. But we will do it not by words. We have to do it by action.
Action is a very good keyword here because it is really noticeable that Poland is ahead of the curve when it comes to defense spending. Talk to me. How has this come about? How has this realization come to the previous government that ramped up defense spending? And to what extent is there a national consensus that this is the right way to go? Because we're looking now in Western Europe at a lot of states that are trying to figure out how they can sell higher defense spending to their people at the expense of other spending. And here Poland has led the way.
Well, I think it's our geographical position and our historical experience, which made us always being hesitant in relations with Russia. For us, Russia or earlier Soviet Union was always a danger. And it was a direct danger because we have a border. Poland has a direct border with Russia. We have also a border with Belarus, which is almost Russia. It's completely controlled by Putin. And we have also a border with Ukraine where there is a war. And Russia invaded this country. And we have also a border with, northern border, which is the sea, where we know Russia is also a player at the Baltic Sea. So we were always feeling that we have to have at our own disposal of a certain capacity, military capacity to be able to react. Of course, in the 90s, where Soviet Union was no more and it was a Russian Federation, we were hoping, like everywhere else in Europe, that Russia will transform into a more democratic and more normal country. But we never had a full trust. That's why Poland and other countries of our region wanted to enter into NATO to be protected we didn't see necessarily always Russia behind, but we wanted to be in the club of countries with a very strong military forces, right? 1999, Poland entered NATO. We celebrated 25 years of that. And we wanted to be a very good ally, so fulfill all the criteria of the membership. And don't forget, NATO members were told to spend 2% as a, max of the GDP for defense. So Poland tried to just do that. And in the same time, in 2008, happened a war in Georgia, which was very much seen in Poland as a very dangerous move towards imperialistic Russia. And Polish president at that time, Lech Kaczynski, went to Georgia, to Tbilisi, and had a very famous speech saying that now is Georgia, but who knows, maybe next one will be Ukraine, and maybe after that will be my country, Poland. He said that in 2008.
Very prophetic.
Yes. So, by the way, there is even a street of his name in Tbilisi, because he was one of the very few, he and President of France, who went at that time to Georgia. So since 2008, we were seeing Russia changing towards imperialistic country. And in 2014 was evident for us when Russia took Crimea. So our budget, which was in 2014 almost 2%, 1.8, since 2014 we constantly increased. So now having over 4%, we are heading towards 5%. And we are seeing this as an obvious reaction on what Russia is doing.
What is the perception of the Polish public and Polish politicians, experts, on the way that the other NATO members have behaved until very recently? Because, you have been meeting your dues. And the Baltic states as well have ramped up their defense spending, but you're looking at more affluent Western states that have been dodging that obligation. So what is the perception on the other NATO members in Poland?
Well, our perception is that we are trying to share our understanding of Russia, which comes from centuries, and share it with the other members who don't have direct border with this country. So we are aware that the perception of threat is different in Europe. Countries who are far away from the eastern border of the EU don't really feel any direct threat from Russia. They don't expect by any way being invaded sometime in the future or attacked, or they don't see Russia as a potentially country who could really send missile on Rome or Paris or Madrid, right? But the fact that Russia invaded Ukraine made Europe much more aware what nature of country is Russia. So I think Poland first tried to convince other members of the European Union and NATO that Russia is dangerous, that we shouldn't do too much business with Russia, and we failed with these arguments. No one really wanted to listen to what we were saying until invasion. Since the invasion in 2022, we feel that our perception of Russia now is understood, and our approach to how to handle Russia is shared. But still, the perception of threat is different, because those countries who are having border with Russia, like Finland, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, Romania, they can share the same feelings with Poland. They understand that one day it can happen that they can be a territory of attack. Other countries in Europe, especially those who are really far away, they definitely condemn Russia for the invasion. They definitely want to support Ukraine, but they don't necessarily feel that something can happen to them directly. So Poland, because of the presidency to the EU Council, as you rightly mentioned, we try to convince all the European countries, convince all the EU member states and also NATO members that the security of the continent cannot be just left to the countries who are geographically at the east. It has to be a common joint effort because it's a huge threat. And it has not to be perceived as just a problem of Eastern countries. It has to be perceived as a problem of the whole Europe. And I think this narrative, by even with the slogan, Security Europe, which is our slogan to the presidency, I think is resonating now. Everybody repeats security word in every single capital of every single EU member state, even in these countries who are not NATO members, like Ireland or Malta.
What is the hope of Poland when it comes to EU commitments to defense? Because it has been incredibly difficult for the EU in the past to come up with a joint defense strategy or even a willingness to think about a joint defense plan.
The hope is very simple. We follow our feelings. If you feel threatened, if you really feel threatened, then that becomes your priority. Your security becomes your priority. And if it's really your priority, then you find the ways, you find financial sources to do something about it. So we very much believe it's a consequence of how the Europeans feel about Russia. And we are example of exactly the same rule. The same goes to Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Greece, who now are spending the most in NATO for defense. So most of the countries now reach the 2% level, but these countries, what I mentioned, overcome this 2%, and they spend 2.5%, 2.85%, almost 3%. Some countries 3.5% of the GDP. So we noticed the constant increase in the military budgets. We don't see it yet in the European South. So Spain is not there, Portugal is not there, Luxembourg is not there. So we would love really everyone to fulfill at least this 2% basic criterion, which is now the minimum of NATO. And all the NATO member states agreed on this condition.
How are you managing the relationship with the United States? We started with this very strong bond, this very strong sense of an ideational kinship that both nations are committed to this ideal of freedom. But you said that it is different under Donald Trump, and many states are trying to figure out a way of operating under Donald Trump and managing the relationship with the United States. What is Poland's approach to the new administration?
Well, it's a very difficult situation. We did not expect this kind of behavior. Let's be very frank. It's how to say. If we compare Europe and the US to a marriage where Europe is a woman and US is a man, there is this theory that Europe is like Venice, like
Robert Kagan,
and and the US is like hard power, like Mars. It would be like discovering that we are threatened and we are betrayed, that our own beloved husband just refuses to admit that we should be taken care of, and this beloved husband has an affair with somebody else. So it's a very bad feeling, but in the same time, we feel the bond. We believe in transatlantic relations. We think it worked very well for Europe and also for the United States. We have a very long list of arguments we want to present to our American friends to change their mindset. For example, economy. Europe and the US are extremely effective economic partners. We have trade and investment at very skyrocketing levels. And of course, it's not only that America has deficit in trade, it's true, but America sells much more in services to Europe. So it's a very equal relationship. And there is a lot of US investment in Europe, but we also have lots of investment of the European businesses in the US. So I think it's a very strong argument to cooperate. In the same time, we have also historical tradition of connections at any other level, academic programs, feeling similarly about, the world, the values that, for example, we respect human life. All this is important still. And we believe that Donald Trump is not the only one in the administration. So we definitely think very, very constructively that we have to do all the efforts possible, both in Poland and elsewhere in Europe, to try to talk to the Americans, to the Republicans, to the people influential in this administration, to show them the profits of being together, to show them the reasons for the US to stay with Europe, to cooperate with Europe, to keep the alliance with Europe. But in the same time, we are absolutely clear that Europe has to be stronger and Europe has to reorganize itself, make reforms, rearm, and be able to stand on our own foot. It's like in the marriage, damage is done. Even if maybe we will, come back to a normal relation, we, Europe, want to be independent, want to be self-sustainable. We want to have friendly relations with the US, but we don't want to depend anymore on the US in any sector.
When I had a closer look at your government, I noticed something that I before had not realized, namely that your foreign minister, Radoslav Sikorski, has a very famous wife, Anne Applebaum,
Indeed.
who is probably one of the loudest critics and intellectuals who is comparing the United States under Donald Trump to authoritarian regimes. Is there any fear in the Polish public that this marriage, this spouse, might be actually detrimental to transatlantic relations?
No. I think there is a feeling that our foreign minister is a very professional minister, outspoken and very well known. And thanks to his personal connections and contacts in the US, but also elsewhere, international network of Radoslav Sikorski is really excellent. He is a right person at that job. And in the same time, having American wife, who is first of all a very good intellectual and writer, famous Pulitzer nominee.
Absolutely.
And a very famous intellectual. Her connections are also very wide. So yes, I agree. She is definitely not a favorite person for Donald Trump, but for the American public, she is influential. She has a voice. She can have an impact on how the Americans think about what's happening in Europe. Problem is with the Trump very narrow circles. And here we can only say we don't know how this could have happened, but we see that they are under very strong Russian propaganda. So in some way, the network Donald Trump has around him and his narrow circles, same, are having contact with some people who share with them very Russian view of what is happening in Ukraine, in Europe, in the world. While in the same time, they are not so much exposed on how we see the situation. And the question mark we put in Poland is, how did it happen that the American citizens, the Republican Party, the party of Ronald Reagan, who was so famous to fight against Soviet Union and to lead America to the victory in the Cold War, the same very party which was so used to have Soviet Union and then Russia as an adversary, now turned into being so soft with Russia and so open to Russian arguments.
What is your sense of where Poland is headed in this transatlantic web? What do you think will be the next developments? What do you think will be the priorities for Poland? Will it be focused mainly on security, or will there also be more interest in how to handle the economic relations?
In a few months, we will finish our long series of elections with presidential elections. So this is the key subject for us right now. In May and June, we'll have presidential elections, 2 terms, and then we'll have finally a new president. The current president of Poland, Andrzej Duda, cannot contest because 2 terms. It's not allowed by the constitution. So we will have a new president. So that's first. Once we know who this person is, the next step will be definitely to focus on European theater as a EU member state in order to help to do EU reforms, especially in defense and security area, but also in economy. We are very much interested in finding the ways for European economy to grow. Poland is not bad. We have the growth of 3.5%, which is, comparing to Western Europe, really a huge achievement.
Oh, yes. We're dreaming of this number.
Exactly. But we are afraid of the performance of, for example, German economy, which is for us a leading partner. 1/3 of our economy is connected with German economy. So we don't want to be, affected by the problems Germany has. And we are very much interested in building strength of European single market and European competitiveness in the world, because we believe that that's a next step for our companies, our businesses, our own economy as well. Poland is the 6th European economy at the moment and 21st in the world. Our ambitions would be to do better, to become even stronger within the EU, maybe number 4, maybe number 3, and definitely enter into the top 20 of the world economies, maybe one day with the vision of entering G20. So that's the economic plan. As far as security, all this will be possible only when Europe will be safe. So that's why there is nothing more important for us than make Europe stronger. Make Europe great again. Let's use this slogan. And only we see our strength as a part of the European project, because otherwise Poland alone, we are not able to face the dangers coming from, firstly, Russia, but who knows, maybe from other sources as well. So that's absolutely priority for us.
Make Europe great again. Many hate the slogan by now, but I like the twist that you're giving it. Professor Bonikowska, I'll butcher this word, but it has to be said in Polish. Dziękuję. Thank you so much for giving so generously of your time. For all those listening to us and who'd like to know more about the Polish approach to Europe, to Polish history, transatlantic relations from a Polish perspective, do you have any recommendations what to read, watch, or listen to?
Well, there is a lot of things available in the internet in English. So you could follow from time to time our own foreign minister, Radosław Sikorski. He speaks quite often on different international fora, and there is a recording of this on YouTube and other internet websites. As far as books, there is always a pleasure to quote Norman Davies and his beautiful books about Central Eastern Europe and Poland in particular. He knows Poland very, very well. He's professor at Oxford University, and he's a great historian. And for those who just want to understand the Polish mentality, just watch certain films. I think the recent one where there is a Hollywood award given, there is a film about 2 Americans coming to Poland, 2 young Jewish Americans coming to Poland to follow their own family history and discover their family places. And I think this film fits very well into what everybody of you can find when you come to Poland.
Wonderful. And I think at the end of the day, we should just visit. So again, dziękuję, Professor Bonikowska, and merci vielmals to everyone who has been listening. We look forward to having you back again. Auf Wiedersehen.
Grüezi Amerika, Views from the Sister Republic, a University of St. Gallen podcast by Claudia Brüwiler.